We're going to talk about the 3 big areas of the body that are contributing to stress in the hip. And usually this is movement stress, so it's friction or pressure or forces that are going through the joints, the soft tissues, ligaments, tendons, muscles. All those things are getting stressed from excessive movement. And so let's talk about the #1 most common cause of hip pain right now. It's actually the hips, which is kind of funny. Earlier we talked about arthritis being a #1 diagnosis. If the joint space decreases, then it's assumed that you have arthritis, and they use things like bone on bone, things like that, assuming that those bones are touching. That can be true. Typically when somebody has bone on bone, if the space is totally gone, then there's going to be no motion. So there are many factors that make that joint space narrow, not just arthritis or aging. In fact, more commonly, it's the muscles around the hip that get tight. So there's a lot of muscles around the hip, many muscles. We're not going to talk about all of them, but let's just say all of them actually. If they're restricted in flexibility, they can actually compress the joint and cause that image to show joint space narrowing. #2 most common cause is actually the foot and ankle. The foot and ankle have a huge influence on what the hips are doing. In fact, I can't move my foot and ankle when I'm standing on the ground or walking upright. I cannot move my foot and ankle without moving my hip. And vice versa, I can't move my hip without motion occurring in my foot. So they're interconnected. So let's talk about 2 common things that happen with the foot. So you're all familiar with the foot flattening out like a pancake. When the foot flattens out like a pancake, that motion grabs onto the lower leg bone and it turns the entire leg inward about 30 degrees. So that means the knee turns in 30 degrees and the hip turns in 30 degrees. Now, if I have excessive motion in my foot and ankle, it's turning in too much. It's unstable. It turns in too much. It's going to cause the hip to turn in more than what it's designed to turn in. And again, if I take any joint in the body and move it beyond its limit, it's going to start to cause stress, overloading the tissues, damage, which then triggers the healing process, which again, inflammation becomes part of that, and pain. So again, foot turning in too much can be a problem. Now, the foot also can have a problem where it doesn't turn in at all. So that's kind of more like my problem. If you have really high arches and a stiff, rigid foot, when the foot turns or flattens out like a pancake, we talked about how it turns the leg in. Well, that's actually valuable. We want the leg to turn in 30 degrees because it activates the muscles in the hip. You see, muscles, when you're not thinking about them, they're just reacting to movement. And in this case, when the hip turns in, the muscles get lengthened. And those muscles, when they get lengthened, turn on and say, oh, I need to control that motion. If I don't have any foot flattening out at all, that can inhibit our hip muscles, which again is going to cause the forces are still transmitted through our foot to our knee to our hip, and they're supposed to continue to the top of our body and leave the body. Gravity and ground reaction forces. And if I don't have hip strength, I'm going to overload the tissues in the hip and I'm going to have damage. So the foot and ankle is really important to successful pain-free hips. So you should be asking yourself, has anybody looked at my feet in order to find a solution for my hip pain? Probably not. Okay, now finally, the 3rd most common area or cause of the hips being painful is actually found in our upper spine. So how our upper torso is moving. And again, that goes back to the concept that when muscles get lengthened, they become strong. So they load. You load those muscles and they build up energy and they become strong. When we are turning our upper body, let's say when we're walking, that turn of the upper body actually lengthens the butt muscles. And that gives us then strength in the hip. So without motion in my upper body, we're gonna have a problem in those hip muscle being strong. So there you have it. Those are the 3 most common regions of the body that are causing hip pain. And 2 of those aren't even in the hips. So you should be asking yourself, have I had those areas looked at? Have they been assessed? Are they moving properly? And could there be a cause of hip pain that's somewhere else besides my hips? Which, by the way, when we have a painful spot in our body, that's kind of a rule of thumb. Most commonly, the cause of the pain in our body is actually not from that area. It's from the areas above and below.